My name is Jean Holsten. I am the new executive director of La Casa de Maria. And on behalf of the Immaculate Heart community, we are thrilled to have you here once again. Our world is kind of beaten up like our beautiful fountain. So those of you that have been coming here for years, that thing used to be just smooth, like glass. But the mud flow, the wars, the violence, the craziness that is going on in our earth is changing everything. That's why we are thrilled to have you here and talking about what you're talking about, but also why we are so committed to opening this place back up. If people took time for reflection, for communing with nature, for being, for learning about the ways that we impact each other, we wouldn't have things like atomic bombs being dropped. We wouldn't buy them, we wouldn't build them, we wouldn't keep them. And we wouldn't think it's a good idea to have a race to keep them. The Casa de Maria has to open back up so that we can have retreats for the people that need to refresh and renew doing work like you're doing, and for people who need to, want to, are seeking a different way of being in this world. So I have cards. I'm happy to talk with any of you about where our plans are at. We're not as far along as we'd like to be, but I want you to know that we are really moving forward with trying to get this place open. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Ivana Nikolić Hughes. I'm the new president of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, and I am absolutely delighted to join Jean in welcoming you all to our 29th annual Sadako Peace Day. We are so grateful to La Casa de Maria and to the Immaculate Heart community for opening these beautiful grounds exclusively for this event. I'm furthermore grateful to all of you for being here with us, to our wonderful staff, Sandy Jones and Carol Warner, without whom today's event wouldn't be possible, and of course, to everyone who will contribute remarks, music, and poetry to help us remember the victims of the devastating attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and all innocent victims of war. Last year, I stood in front of you after only a few days of officially being a part of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation. And I could not have imagined a more meaningful occasion to proclaim my devotion and passion and commitment to the cause of nuclear disarmament and nuclear abolition. And moreover, to meet and get to know so many members of our beautiful community. A year later, I am even more passionate and more committed to this cause. The stories of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are one part of what these horrendous weapons can do, what they have done, and what they have the potential to do today, tomorrow, and in the future. When you reflect on all that we know about nuclear weapons, on all of their many consequences, there is only one conclusion possible, and that is that the only path forward is a world free of nuclear weapons. We're fortunate today to have with us the Vice Chair of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation's board, Jimmy Hara, who will speak to us about the story of Sadako and the messages from the Hibakusha community about the importance of nuclear disarmament and nuclear abolition. I also just want to take a moment to remember a very special anti-nuclear activist and close friend and advisor to the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, who passed away in June, and that is Dr. Daniel Ellsberg. Dr. Ellsberg is best known for releasing the Pentagon Papers, which led to the end of the Vietnam War at great personal risk. Following this heroic action, Dr. Ellsberg devoted decades of his life to fighting for nuclear disarmament and what he called the dismantlement of the nuclear doomsday machine. I want to read to you a short excerpt from his book by the same name, The Doomsday Machine, which pertains to a conversation he had with his father near the end of his father's life. The conversation has to do with Dan's father quitting a job because it would have implicated him in research related to nuclear weapons development. This was happening when Dan was much, much younger. And so I'm going to read from the book. This is the book, The Doomsday Machine. He was leaving the best job he'd ever had, and he didn't have any other to turn to. He lived on savings for a while and did some consulting. I asked my father what had made him feel so strongly to act in a way that nobody else had done. He said, "You did." That didn't make any sense. I said, "What do you mean? We didn't discuss this at all. I didn't know anything about it." Dad said, "It was earlier. I remember you came home with a book one day and you were crying. It was about Hiroshima. You said, 'Dad, you've got to read this. It's the worst thing I've ever read.'" I said that must have been John Hersey's book, Hiroshima, in 1946. I didn't remember giving it to him. "Yes, well, I read it and you were right. That's when I started to feel bad about working on anything having to do with atomic bombs. And then when they said they wanted me to work on a hydrogen bomb, it was too much for me. I thought it was time for me to get out." I would like to invite you to please join me in a moment of silence for Dan, for Sadako, and for all innocent victims of war. Thank you.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt referred to the bombing of Pearl Harbor as a day of infamy. I would submit to you there are two other days of infamy. August the 6th, 1945, when Hiroshima was bombed, and August the 9th, 1945, when Nagasaki was bombed. One of the victims of the bombing of Hiroshima, who actually survived the bombing, was a young girl, Sadako Sasaki, and we're in the beautiful garden in her honor. Sadako actually grew up to be a very athletic young girl and prided herself in being the fastest girl in her class. So she tried out for the relay team. She was the fastest girl trying out for the relay team, but at that point, she collapsed. And she had what the Japanese refer to as genbakubyo, atomic bomb disease, what we know as leukemia. she was hospitalized, and early in her hospital stay, she was visited by her very best friend, Shizuko Hamamoto. And Shizuko brought with her a piece of origami paper. And Sadako asked her, "What's this all about?" At which point Shizuko said, "Don't you know, if you can fold 1,000 paper cranes, you can get any wish that you want." So dutifully, she folded the paper crane. Friends and family would also bring pieces of origami paper, and she would dutifully fold them. And early in her hospital stay, Shizuko came up to her and said, "So Sadako, if you can fold 1,000 paper cranes, what would be your wish?" And her wish was, "Oh, that I get over this silly disease and help you and the team win ribbons for our school with the relays." Later on in the hospital stay, Shizuko visited her again, and Sadako said, "You know, Shizuko, I don't know that I'm ever going to get over this illness. So my wish then would be, I'm going to inscribe the word heiwa, meaning peace, and inscribe it onto the wing of these paper cranes, and have them fly around the world, spreading peace in this world." A short while later, unfortunately, Sadako passed away. But at her memorial service, friends and family folded not only 1,000, but 10,000 paper cranes to adorn the altar of her memorial service. A few weeks later, the city of Hiroshima erected a statue in her honor, the Sadako Memorial. And it's right in front of the Hiroshima Peace Museum. And the inscription on that statue reads, "Hear our prayer, hear our cry, peace on earth." Every year on August the 6th, there are 10 schools, grammar schools, middle schools, high schools, and even universities that are given the honor of folding 1,000 paper cranes, so that every August the 6th, there will be 10,000 paper cranes on her statue. Now, the reason Sadako developed leukemia, she was exposed to one of the isotopes, radioisotopes, that can create problems for human beings. I-131, iodine-131, we actually all know about here in California, because when the Fukushima Daiichi reactor had an accident and created tsunami and what have you, here in California, everyone wanted to take potassium iodide to protect themselves from developing thyroid cancer. Potassium iodide 137 has a half-life only about 8 days, but there are two others that have a half-life of 30 years. One of them is strontium-90. And strontium-90 behaves like calcium and was responsible for the leukemia that Sadako developed. But in Japan, there have been a number of people who developed various types of bone cancer, multiple myeloma, and what have you. And there's another very diabolical radioisotope, cesium-137. Cesium-137 behaves just like potassium does. It gets picked up by plants and gets concentrated in fruit, just like potassium. And so after the Fukushima Daiichi disaster, actually, it was forbidden to eat the very famous Kobe beef because the cattle had grazed on contaminated grass. But it's cesium-137 that was responsible for all of the gastric cancer that occurred in the 1960s and 70s in Japan, where then they had mobile vans going to villages to do gastroscopy, seeing if they could detect early gastric cancer. Korea had the same issue with gastric cancer because the radiation fallout fell onto Korea. And the most diabolical of all of the radioisotopes, which has a half-life of 24,000 years, is strontium-239. I'm sorry, not strontium, but plutonium-239. And plutonium basically ends up being inhaled, and polonium gets released. And this very day, as I'm talking, there are many Japanese women who are in their 80s, 90s, and even 100 who have never smoked a day in their life, who are in hospitals with lung cancer. So once again, the health effects are amazing, but on top of that, understand when the 2 atomic bombs were dropped, there were blast effects that sent pieces of concrete and wood and what have you, and caused a lot of damage. And on top of that, firestorms erupted, just like there's a firestorm currently occurring in Maui as I speak. But these firestorms were of a heat approximating the heat of the sun. So people had terrible burns. And in fact, unfortunate people who are fairly close to the epicenter, who are standing on concrete, were vaporized. And the vapors plummeted onto the concrete. And we call those nuclear shadows. And there are many individuals who we only remember now as nuclear shadows. So once again, Hiroshima, 140,000 individuals ultimately perished as a result of that bombing. In Nagasaki, another 80,000 individuals perished as a result of that bombing. So Oppenheimer is a great movie that's out currently. And one of his mentors was Albert Einstein. And in the words of Albert Einstein, he said, "The splitting of the atom has changed everything save our mode of thinking. And thus, we drift toward unparalleled catastrophe."
Hi, I'm Emma Trelles, and I want to say thank you to the foundation and to everyone for gathering here today to remember the deaths and losses inflicted by war. and to also honor the power of peace and community. This poem is called The Function of a Wing. They arrive as red masked druids, ghost the edge of the desolate golf course. Sandhill cranes, poised between the tall grass and the oaks, lathered in moss, a fading this pocket of homes long past afternoons of stickball and smoking grills. Hearts alert to the rhythm of clouds, despite how loneliness drifts beside us all. Each day's arc is a wing, a wish hurling across the sky, and also time, because what is the clock but a ship of travel we must board upon our first breath? I have read about a girl who pinned her healing to the making of cranes, and how they navigate by starlight, instinct, the ancient maps scored inside the lace of their bones. They know how to dance. They arrive as themselves. A newborn will curl around her mother's temples in peace, a place where no harm will descend in its poisonous light, its cell-stripping forms, a place of quiet and journey that is a kind of returning to love.
The name of this song is Nukes or Nuts. They changed the world at the end of the war. 1945. Fat man, little boy. How did anyone survive? How did anyone survive? Nukes are nuts, turn the world into dust, and that'll be the end of us. Nukes are nuts, yeah. Nobody knew what just happened. A mushroom cloud filled the sky. Even atheists were praying, good God, don't let me die. Good God, don't let me die. Nukes are nuts, turn the world into dust, and that'll be the end of us. Nukes are nuts. Nine nations got their finger on a trigger, playing God with megatons. One mistake, it's all over. The first to go will be the lucky ones. The first to go will be the lucky ones, yeah. Nukes are nuts, turn the world into dust, and that'll be the end of us. Nukes are nuts, yeah. First a blast, then a fire, then back to the frozen age. But no one will ever see it. We'll be long gone in a vapor grave. It will be long gone in a vapor grave. Nukes are us. What could we do with all that money? What's the cost to play this game? Everybody's dying to live. Anything this crazy got to be insane. Anything this crazy gotta be insane. Nukes are nuts. Turn the world into dust. That'll be the end of us. Nukes are nuts.
It is also my great pleasure to be here with a community of people celebrating peace. I'm poet David Starkey, and my son Stephen lives in Osaka, and I went to Hiroshima this past April for the second time. This poem is called At the Peace Park for Perie Longo. Almost 40 years since I was last here, wandering across Japan with a backpack and a Kodak camera, taking pictures of everything. It's done up now, the Memorial Museum, with video recreations, dramatic spotlights on a scorched tricycle, a soldier's blast-torn uniform. And it's crowded, shoulder to shoulder, in places where the exhibits are especially grim. A babel of voices, all the tongues of the world. In the souvenir shop, I buy origami paper, pink, yellow, green, for a friend who will know how to fold the cranes. Or if she doesn't, we'll learn. Thank you.
David, thank you. How wonderful for someone to dedicate a poem to you or for you, written in the very place we're talking about tonight. So thank you, David. I will read a poem, but first I'm going to read a couple of poems by David Krieger, which I did last year. David can't be with us, but he and I have been writing. He loves poetry, as most of you know who know David. And so he has 2 haiku that he wrote, that he's written very recently, and I'll start with those. Hiroshima, not a word alone, also a prayer. And then a poem about a name that's already been mentioned tonight a couple of times. Dan Ellsberg, he knew the meaning of war in the nuclear age. And then I would like to read David's poem from his book, God's Tears, and it is titled The Bells of Nagasaki. We felt this was, and he felt it was an appropriate poem to read this particular Peace Foundation Day, it being the anniversary of the bombing of Nagasaki. The bells of Nagasaki ring for those who suffered and those who suffer still. They draw old women to them and young couples with love-glazed eyes. They draw in small children walking awkwardly toward the epicenter. The bells of Nagasaki, elusive as a flowing stream, ring for each of us, ring like falling leaves. David has a note at the bottom of this poem from his book, God's Tears, which I mentioned. Let's make sure the echoes of Nagasaki bells are heard throughout the world. Never lose hope and never give up the struggle for a safe and saner world free of all nuclear weapons. So that is always the message of this wonderful peace celebration. And I'm very glad to be a part of it. And again, for many years, and to see all of your wonderful faces again. And as everyone has said, thank you for coming. And Jimmy, thank you. And Ivana, who flew, her plane was canceled, and she had to get up at 4 and then go back home and get up at 4 again the next morning to get here. So even it's a miracle. We're always surrounded with miracles. And I'm going to read my poem. It's called Magic Poem. It was a poem that began a long time ago when I didn't know it was a poem. And then all of a sudden one day it became a poem, and I thought it might be kind of fitting to read since we are honoring Sadako, who was a little child. And for many years I taught poetry in the schools to children, and this poem grew out of that. Magic Poem. Long before the internet, during a radio interview, my second grade student was asked what he liked about poetry. It's magic, he bubbled. You'd be surprised how many poems a town can write in a day. I transmuted back to kindergarten, nap time, Jabberwocky me cast in the cloak closet, told to hush until someone comes. It smells like death, snow-wet coats molding in the dark. Caught in a terror of what could be the rest of my life, the door opens. With a sliver of light comes the hand of Sister Mary, not another word, please, holding a magic wand, my rank elevated to wake-up fairy. She slips a white cloak over me, instructs no one may budge until I tap them on the head with the wand. One by one, my classmates and I gaze at each other as if for the first time, eye to eye, smiles ear to ear, no words. Years later, I tell children their pencils are wands made of magic. Hang on for dear life. During the war, my father wrote my mother love poems to cure her dark mood. You could feel the air thaw. Small wonder my ego-driven self often dreamt about 2 armies on horseback. One red, one white, me bossing in the middle. Before anyone throws a bomb at each other, you have to write a poem about who you love. It would take a world of poems to make up for today's chasms, annihilate hate. We'd all have to listen. We might be surprised.